Hello, I'm Leah from Artisan U, and today I'm going to show you how to do a silk screen on glass using tissue paper. So for supplies, I have 2 squares of glass. So I'm going to paint on one of them and then we're going to lay the other on top. So you'll need 1 square of clear and 1 of either white or clear. I also have paint, a sponge for painting with. A brush can work, but it's easier to keep the paint from rubbing back off the glass if you use a sponge. And a silk screen and my Silkscreen medium powder, and a palette, paper towels for drying my sponge, and I have a small piece of tissue paper that I'm going to do the silk screen on. The first thing I'm going to do is set aside my square that I'm going to lay over my other one when I'm finished painting, just so that I don't accidentally paint that one. And then I'm going to paint this bottom tile with 2 layers of white paint with my sponge. If you have a white piece of glass for your bottom piece, you don't need to do this first step. So this paint takes a lot longer to dry on glass than it does if you use it on bisque, because this is bisque paint, but it will dry eventually. So I'm going to paint it one time, and then I'm going to let it dry all the way so that I don't rub the paint back off when I paint it a second time. And then I'll paint it the second time. And then let that dry all the way, and then we can do our next step. So there's my first coat. Now I'm going to let it dry, and then I'll come back and do the next one. Okay, so I finished painting my 2 coats on my piece of glass and have let it dry all the way. Now I'm going to set this aside, and the next thing we're going to do is put our Silkscreen stencil on our piece of tissue paper. So try and get it as smooth as you can if it's crumpled. And now we have to mix our paint. So I'm going to put some black paint on my palette, and then I'm going to take a pinch of this white Silkscreen medium powder here and sprinkle it over the top. Then I'm going to mix it in. I'm just using the back end of a paintbrush to mix in my powder, and it's going to make our paint thicker so that it doesn't bleed in our stencil. So we're going for about the consistency of peanut butter here. And I might need to add a little bit more powder, I'll see. Getting close, but I'm going to add just a little bit more powder. Okay, so this is what my paint looks like now, the consistency that it is. So now I'm going to take my Silkscreen stencil, this one's a cat, and I'm going to lay it on top of my tissue paper. If your tissue paper has a shiny side and kind of a dull side, do it on the shiny side. And do the stencil backwards from the way you want it to be. So I'm going to lay this down, and then I'm going to get this thickened paint on the end of my finger, quite a bit of it, and I'm going to gently rub it over this, because if you push too hard, it will just come right back off the paper. So I get more on my finger than I would normally do when silk screening, and gently rub it over until the whole thing is coated. trying to make sure that it doesn't move. So light and gentle is the key. We don't want to push really hard, but we want to have enough paint that it still gets in the stencil. So I'm just gently rubbing around. Okay, now I'm going to carefully pick the stencil up off of here. And you can see how it made the picture on here. So now I'm going to lay this down and let it dry all the way. And I'm going to put my stencil right in water so that the paint doesn't dry in it. Okay, so once your stencil is most of the way, if not all the way dry, I'm going to take a scissors, and you can see where I got off the stencil here at the edges of my black paint. So I'm just going to take a scissors and cut around those so they don't go on my tile when I transfer the silkscreen to the tile. Okay, so now I'm going to use a large brush to put one coat of my background color of paint onto my tile. Just be very gentle when you do this, if you're using a brush especially, because the paint will easily pull off the glass. So I'm just going to get a decent amount of paint on my brush and gently pull it across. Just try to get an even coat on here so that it's smooth for transferring your stencil. And do it as fast as you can without pulling paint off. Because it needs to be wet to put your silkscreen on. So I'm just going to paint the whole thing with one coat of yellow, because that's my background color. Okay, and it's still quite wet. So I'm going to take my stencil and I'm going to turn it so that the side that I did the stencil on is down. And I'm going to lay it down gently where I want on my tile and gently press on it to make sure it's smooth and it's all touching the wet paint. Just gently patting it with one of my fingers. Okay, now you just need to let it dry all the way until your paint is totally dry. Alright, so my tile is totally finished drying, and just be aware that it will take quite a while to dry because it takes a long time to dry on the glass because the glass can't absorb any of the water out of the paint, so it all has to evaporate, and then having the tissue paper on top of it slows it down even more. I used a blow dryer to speed things up a little bit, but even that took a little longer than I expected. You can always check the back of the glass and you can kind of see a darker outline if it's still wet. So this is totally dry. So now I'm going to gently peel my tissue paper off. Just be very careful. Just slowly and carefully peeling this off. And as you can see, some of it will still kind of stay on the tissue paper, but most of it will be left behind on the tile. So there you have it. Now you can, if you had any mistakes, you can try to touch them up, but it will be more difficult on glass than it would be to do on pottery. Then you can just lay your second piece of glass over top of it, and it's ready to be fired. So that is how you do a silkscreen on glass using tissue paper. And it works a lot better in my experience than just doing the silkscreen straight onto the glass, because pressing on the silkscreen can pull paint up off of the glass while you're trying to put the silkscreen down onto it. And this way the paint dries on the glass, so you're not pressing on the paint and lifting it up with it. So that's how it works. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.